Hello, everyone. Your friendly neighborhood spider fanboy here to bring you part 2 to What If Ichigo unlocked true Zangetsu early. So, last we left off, we had just finished off with the Soul Society arc. Ichigo has progressed much faster, at least in understanding his true abilities and just how far he can stretch his abilities. Rather than gaining access to Bankai, he is instead focused on understanding the nature of his abilities and mastering them to their fullest potential before moving on to Bankai. He even his usage of even if they are somewhat rudimentary, his ability to grasp such abilities like Blood Vein, Sonido, and Iron Skin has caught Aizen's attention, and he is very much invested into just how far he's going to come and how much he may just exceed his own expectations. So we do get back to the living world, um, and in between the time since the end of the Soul Society arc and the beginning of the new semester at school, Ichigo has been questioning his Sanbakuto spirits. He's a lot more in active contact with them in comparison to canon. Every night before bed, he practices that meditation that he was told by Kisuke, because he was kind of rushed through achieving his Shikai, and he had it beaten into him during his Bankai training, which really wasn't Bankai training. His training with both sides of his Sanpakuto spirits, that he needs to master where he currently is before he can think about achieving Bankai. So every night he does that kind of meditation that was discussed, I think, like in canon, where like normal Shinigami would meditate all the time and keep their Asauchis on them at all times in order to learn the true name of their Sanpakuto, or just to develop their Sanpakuto before trying to learn their true name. And he does learn how to do that meditation and seep into his inner world of his own volition. And through that, he's been able to question them. They haven't given him too many answers, but they have done things like explain the name of the various techniques he's learned. So Sonido and Bala, those techniques he's learned from White, and he has learned that White somehow has some hollow nature in him. He's figured that out pretty quickly. He has some kind of hollow nature, and he is able to get out of White that yes, they are hollow based techniques, and that if he wants to master them and master any kind of hollow ability, he's gonna have to prove that he's able to handle himself. He's gonna have to prove that he can stay in control, and that he's not just gonna rely on White all the time. Because if he does rely on those powers all the time, he may as well just take control for himself. So yeah, he'll teach him, but he has to learn how to rely on his own power, as well as White's. And from Old Man Zangetsu, he's able to learn about Blood Vein, his affinity for it, and that his abilities aren't like the Hollow's abilities. They're not instinctual. They're techniques that have to be learned, but that his affinity for it is somewhat and yet not surprising at the same time, as his mother did have quite the affinity for the ability, and that gets Ichigo's attention. What? His mother? What the hell does that mean? And he says if he wants answers, he knows who he has to ask. And this does kind of get Ichigo pissed. He does try to snap at him, but he is sent out of his inner world. And the next day, he decides to, after school, he decides to sit down with his dad. And he asks him just how much does he really know. Because he knows he can see spirits. He knows Karen can see spirits. And Yuzu has mentioned that she can't see anything concrete, but she is aware that things happen. So he just straight up asks his father, what the hell does he know? And this kind of gets Ishin to, break out of his usual goofy demeanor that he puts up. It gets him a little serious, a lot like that day where during Masaki's anniversary, where they went to go visit her grave. He gets a look quite like that. He's like very serious and somber, and he explains. He decides that if he really wants all the answers, he'll give them to him right here and right now. And Ichigo decides, yeah, I do. I want to know what's going on. I want to know. I want to know these things. I want to make sure that I'm prepared. I need to be strong, and I can't be strong if I don't have answers. I can't. If I'm unsure all the time, I'll never be able to move forward. I'll constantly be hesitating. I'll be second guessing, and I can't afford to do that. This Aizen guy's around. I need to be able to protect everyone. And this gets Ishin to smile a little. So much like your mother, he comments, and he's like, all right, I'll explain everything. And he says, just wait until tomorrow while the girls are out at school, and I promise I'll explain everything. Um, he's like, school starts tomorrow. I promise I'll explain everything tomorrow while the girls are at school. You and me will sit down and we'll talk. I promise. Or not so much while they're at school. He says Yuzu's gonna be going shopping tomorrow after school, and Karen's gonna be trying out for her. She's gonna be practicing her soccer. She's gonna practice some soccer before joining Yuzu on her shopping trip for groceries and stuff. So while they're gone out tomorrow, I promise I'll tell you everything. And Ichigo decides, all right, fine, that's fine. We'll do that then. So they come. Everyone goes back to school. It's the yeah. It's they go back to school. It's the day where Shinji comes in, and he ends up yeah. Ichigo ends up learning about Shinji's nature, the fact that he has Soul Reaper powers, and he can feel something a little different. He can feel something there's something that's very clearly off about Shinji, and Shinji ends up giving him the offer to join him and the rest of the Vizards. And this is only brings up more question in Ichigo's mind, while also solidifying, yes, he does have some kind of connection to Hollows. That's just a part of him. He knows it's not just because of the process he went through with Kisuke. He knows that there's something different, because White was already all hollowified looking. He had those eyes, and it's clear that he's always had, in the same way that he's always had Shinigami powers, as explained to him by Kisuke, he's always had these hollow powers. And with the old man bringing up that apparently his mom had powers, he's just questioning everything. So eventually, that night, it's the same night where Ichigo, he fights off a Menos and he's able to handle it. But when he returns, he can sense something going on. He can sense a couple of fights. In the distance, after he very easily deals with the Menos, he can sense Uryu. He can sense someone that's very similar to Uryu. Briefly, he sensed a hollow nearby Uryu, but Uryu seems to be good now, and as well as with whoever that other person is that feels a lot like Uryu. And he kind of guesses maybe it's a relative, maybe it's his dad, or mom, or whoever. But what he really focuses in on are the two signatures that he'll never be able to forget. One is Grand Fisher, who he zooms towards, but the second causes him to briefly stop before he zooms towards the location even faster. It's his dad, and he's so powerful. And when he focuses on the spirit ribbons leading directly to his dad as he ends up turning up on the scene, he notices one of them begins to dissipate as Grand Fisher is killed by Ishin, but the other is his father, standing there in Shinigami robes, standing before Kon, who is in Ichigo's body. And he's like, Ishin looks up towards Ichigo. He's like, I guess I really do have some explaining to do. I wish it wasn't like this, but let's go on ahead and get into this. They end up heading inside. They're back in their normal bodies. And as Yuzu and Karen, as they're eating dinner, Yuzu and Karen notice that there's a bit of a tense silence between Ichigo and Ishin. And they both end up going to bed. Or so they say. Karen manages to talk Yuzu into listening in from the stairs as Ichigo and Ishin sit down at the table. Normally they probably would have noticed, and hell, Ishin probably does, but he decides he may as well be open to all of his children, even if he's not openly doing so. He's like, if the girls really want to listen in on this, that's fine, he'll handle it. But it's clear Ichigo needs these answers, and he needs them now. So he sits Ichigo down, he tells him everything. Everything he knows. He tells him everything from his perspective, how he was once the Shinigami of the Shiba clan, um, how he was a captain, uh, and how he met his mother. They were attacked by a hollow. The hollow managed to infect his mother. His mother is a Quincy, which really rattles Ichigo, and that because of the hollow infecting his mother, Ichigo inherited hollow powers. The hollow passed down onto him, and it bonded with his very soul. And he has the powers of a Shinigami, a hollow, and a Quincy. And that there's really no one else like him. And this kind of, this really kind of rattles Ichigo. And, he ends up going back to bed. Um, he's like, I'm just going to have to think about this. And he contemplates using, I think it's the Jisen or something like that. Let me see, hold on. Jinsen. No. Yeah, Jinsen Senkei, the sword meditation combat stance. Uh, no, I'm looking at. No, hold on. Jinsen. This method is the only way. Yeah, okay, Jinsen. Yeah, it's when they talk with their. Yeah, they're talking with their Zanpakuto. So he contemplates doing so, but he's somewhat reluctant to, and he just kind of goes to sleep. He decides to just kind of sleep on it. Unfortunately, he's not going to get out of this situation. White decides that they might as well talk about this now, and he drags Ichigo into his inner world as he goes to sleep. This kind of pisses Ichigo off. He kind of wanted to just sleep this off, but he's like, yeah, no, there's no way you were going to get any sleep, you broody little teenager. And he's like, no, we're just going to talk about this now. And he ends up engaging Ichigo in a fight to try to get him to blow off some steam, and it does somewhat work. But eventually, they all kind of settle on the side of the buildings and they begin talking. Um, they explain that yeah, they are the representations of his powers, with the old man explaining that he's the representation, that he takes on the form of the god of Quincy's, or so is claimed. He takes on his physical form from 1,000 years ago, but that's not what's important right now. If he really wants to go stronger, he's going to have to learn how to accept them, these parts of himself, and accept his own Sanpakuto spirits as they are the representation of him, and that he's going to have to accept himself in full to accept that this is who he is, or at least what is in his nature. And Ichigo kind of, he's going to have to sit on that, and he's going to have to learn to just accept that this is the way things are. This is who he is. Even if he didn't always realize it, this is who he is. And if he wants to go stronger, well, he only has more avenues now than ever. So they will help him, so long as he keeps up his end of the deal as stated. That he will continue to prove himself, to prove his strength, that he can keep himself safe while keeping everyone else safe. As long as he can do that, they will continue to help him in growing stronger. And he eventually he does thank them, and he says, "All right then, I'll continue to go stronger, I promise." And he asks if he should try to go to Ishida or Uryu for training. And he says that the old man says that he'll be able to teach him the basics, but if he truly wishes to, he won't stop him. And Ichigo kind of turns to White and asks if he should go to the Visors for the same. And he's like, same thing here. I'll continue to make you stronger, but might as well have some punching bags. Might as well have some training dummies in the real world. They'll be able to help you get a proper handle on it. I can teach you the basics, but it's up to you from there. And Ichigo decides he's not only going to accept joining the Visors, but he's going to have to talk to Uryu. So, the next day, Ichigo not only confronts, he has his confrontation with Shinji, and this time he tells him that he's willing to work with the Visors, but that he's gonna have some other training that he needs to take care of. So he helps, he understands. He just tells him, I'm not gonna be able to dedicate full time. I have some other training to do on my own, with someone else. But I'll join you. I'll keep your secret. I won't tell anyone. Whatever. but I'm willing to work with the vibes, is what he says. And Shinji's a little suspicious, but he's like, he's probably just training with Kisuke. May not really like him all that much, but he's trustworthy. So, trustworthy enough at least. So he decides, all right then, make sure to meet us sometime soon, and we'll work on this all. We'll work this all out. Just make sure to meet us sometime soon. Gives him the card or whatever. And near the end of school, Ichigo asks if he can talk to Uryu. He asks Uryu if he could talk to him. He wants to discuss something with him. But Uryu says that he has something that he needs to do with his father. And Ichigo is understanding enough to back off for now. He supposes he could focus on working with the Vizards for now, while Uryu handles whatever it is he's handling. The old man said he could still teach him the basics, so he has plenty of time. Or so he thinks. As that same day, Yami and Ukiura show up. And Ichigo he puts up a pretty good fight against Yami. He makes use of he shows up on the scene. Chad is missing an arm, and yeah, that is what happened in the manga. His arm was practically torn to shreds. It was all twisted and mangled. Orihime is healing him and everyone else, trying to keep them safe. Ichigo shows up, and interestingly enough, at least to Ukiura, because of course Yami doesn't really care, but Ukiura notices that he appears with a buzz of static, and he's confused. This is Shinigami, right? And Ichigo shows off his acceptance of his various abilities by making full use of what he has access to. He shows off his speed with his mixture of flash step and sonito. He's able to land a good few hits on Yami, and he's even able to pierce through his iron skin, even if he's only leaving like just cuts, very thin cuts at first. Hold on, let me actually look up the fight. I want to make sure that I have this correctly, so give me one quick second. I'll be right. Okay, we're back. Just had to go over the fight real quick. Okay, yeah. Ichigo ends up showing up. He's able to stop Yami. Stop him right in his tracks. And rather than struggling with White after cutting off Yami's arm, he is instead able to continue with the fight. And while Yami does say that he should keep his eyes open, and he'll be ready to switch out if he needs to, it doesn't quite freeze Ichigo in his tracks. Talking with White instead just kind of causes him to briefly shift focus. It's enough for Yami to begin getting in a few hits of his own. But Ichigo is able to regain control of the fight despite White's constant backchat. And Ichigo essentially tries to tell him, no backseat driving or no backseat fighting. I've got this for now. And White ends up kind of shrugging on, saying, fine, but don't come crying to me when you end up getting your arm ripped off or something. They continue their fight. Ichigo is able to hold his own, and if it weren't for the fact that there's so many people, all of the people that were in the park and that were left unconscious because of Yami deciding to go for a snack, if it weren't for all that, Ichigo wouldn't hesitate in just shutting this guy up with the Getsuga. But as it is, he's trying to restrict himself. He's making use of he's trying to make use of blood artery to increase his strength, to try to actually kill this guy just through pure swordplay, and as well as the occasional balo that he kind of just throws from his blade. It kind of just like a small wave of red, not even a Getsuga, just maybe something that he shoots from the end of his larger Zangetsu. A small bala that he ends up he just tries out a couple techniques against Yami, but he's constantly keeping his eye on he's constantly keeping Ukiura in his peripheral, and eventually Yami does try to draw out his Sanpakuto, which gets Ukiura to speak up. He's like, I can't believe you need to try against this guy. He's like a runt, dude. He's not even that strong. Obviously, he's a lot more apathetic about it. But he's like, really, Yami? You need your Zanpakuto for this run? For this kid? Really? I mean, I know he's the one that Lord Aizen is interested in, but he's really not all that much of a threat. Eventually, Urahara does show up when Yami kind of just snaps from being mocked by Ukiura and being trash talked by Ichigo. Um, and he ends up trying to retaliate with a Sero. Ichigo prepares himself to use a Getsuga to try to deflect it into the air, but Urahara arrives just in time, sets up the barrier, and is able to contain the blast, stopping any kind of collateral damage from taking place. Um, Things end up mostly the same. Ichigo does kind of want to jump back into the battle, but he's held back by Kisuke when Ukiura kind of steps in and says, "Yeah, it's about time we go." And that's when Kisuke kind of stops Ichigo from interfering, and Ichigo himself, he begins to focus in on Ukiura, and he can just not sense the end of his power. And he's like, "Okay, yep, not gonna try and f with that." Orihime does, unfortunately, have a little bit of that mental break, and she loses faith in her abilities, and she can't make use of her offensive power because Tsubaki kind of got effed up. A few days pass, and in that time, he's learning a little bit more about his abilities, and he's actually checked in with the Vizards. He has his conversation with them a lot earlier, and this time it's not all that hostile. It's not him losing control of his abilities. He's a lot calmer, and he's like, "Yeah, I kind of wanna get the hang of my abilities. So if you guys could help me out, I'd appreciate that a lot." So I think, yeah, on the timeline it says that 4 days passed, but I'm not sure how true that is. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put in, yeah, 4 days go on ahead and pass. Um, he gets 4 days of training with the Vizards. He gets his introduction with them, and he does start sparring with them. And here he's able to handle his own against Hiyori. You know, base Shikai to just base Hiyori, he's able to trounce her, but when she breaks out the mask, he begins to surpass what he's capable of. And again, he's not trying to destroy the place, so he's not throwing out full on Getsugas or Getsuga Jujishos, which of course gets her to mock him, saying, "Oh, what, you can't pull out your full power against a little girl," after after he insulted her about her height a few times. But eventually, he decides to call out to White. He's like, you want to show her? Why don't we show her what we're really made out of?" And that actually gets White. He's like, "Yeah, yeah, let's do it." The two of them actually kind of work together similarly to how they did with Byakuya. And Ichigo notices that he's a lot stronger this time when he's making use of White's abilities. The mask kind of begins to grow a little bit more. He notices that more of it is covering his face, but what he's really focused on is the fight. Rather than just completely losing control against Hiyori, this time he sheaths his smaller Quincy blade, and he begins making use of White. And he notices once again that his larger blade is beginning to turn white in response to his holification. And he begins fighting against Hiyori with a lot more vigor. And as the battle goes on, he is losing a little bit more to White's influence. He's letting himself get a little bit more and more carried away with the battle as it continues. And eventually, he damn near charges a full power Black Getsuga that he nearly lets loose. But this is when the rest of the Vizards pin him down and crack his mask. And from there, rather than going through the same Vizard training as in canon, he instead learns to battle in conjunction with White without losing control in the same way that he did. So he actually learns to work with White even more. He gets more practice fighting like that. And he eventually does decide to test out what it's like to fully holify. The rest of the Visor actually bring this up, and he decides, why the hell not? Let's give it a go. So that's what or nah, we're not gonna have him fully holify yet. So rather, he's just working with a partial mask. the mask like only partially manifesting, and he can only hold that for 7 seconds. We'll go for the 7 seconds. Um, but yeah, he can only hold his partial mask for up to about 7 seconds, and as he begins to, he gets just more and more used to working with that. Whereas whenever he's training on his own at home, like he goes into his Jinsen, he begins to practice his Quincy techniques with the old man, with old man Zangetsu. He hasn't yet talked to Uryu. He's decided to give him a couple of days before talking to him, before bringing up training with him. So yeah, he hasn't quite gotten to that just yet. Um, Eventually, the the other Shinigami, Toshiro Rangiku, yeah, the Hitsugaya's advanced team all show up. So it's Rangiku, Rukia, Ranji, Ikaku, Yumichika, and Hitsugaya. They all show up, and we also get our battle with them with the Soul Reapers versus Grimjow and his fraction. Most of the other battles go about the same, and of course, our main focus is on Ichigo versus Grimjow, where Ichigo is at first pretty confident. He's been working on his synergy in battling with White as well as working on the proficiency of his Quincy techniques. So he's a little confident. Um, and that confidence is pretty quickly shut down. He's stronger a good few leagues than what Bankai Ichigo is, but Grimjow is a different monster entirely. There's still a bit of a power disparity between the two, and while Ichigo does somewhat impress Grimjow, he of course says that I don't really see what it is that scared off Ukiura. Just what is it that you have that has Lord Aizen, that has Lord Aizen's attention? I just don't get it, kid. Where is it? Where's the strength? Where's the power? Show it to me. And as he begins to pressure Ichigo, Ichigo decides to respond. Might as well show him. And he is eventually able to get Grimjow to back up with the Getsuga Jisho that sends him flying into the air. And it does leave some burn marks across his arms, but it didn't go through and cause him that big old chest scar. Not yet. That is until he focuses in on Ichigo and sees the white mask forming on his face, the whitening of his larger blade, and the big black Getsuga charging directly at him. He once again throws up his now injured arms, and he feels his left arm give. His arm was destroyed thanks to the giant black Getsuga, and he notices that Ichigo is focusing on him. When the blast dissipates, Grimjow's about to respond in kind to Ichigo, preparing for their second bout, and Grimjow is definitely pissed. He already has his hand on his Zanpakuto toe, whereas Ichigo is now deciding to make use of both of his blades. Whenever he works with White, he normally focuses on wielding White's blade and puts his Quincy Zangetsu back on his hip. But now he's trying to try something new. He's trying to wield both of his blades while hollowified, or while making use of his hollow mask. But right before they could get into the second round of their battle, Tosin does show up. He forces Grimjow back into Hueco Mundo, and rather than taking his arm because he's already lost one to Ichigo, Aizen instead just blows a hole through I think it's his torso, because he has. Where does he have the 6? Hold on. Grimjow 6. I want to see where he has. Yes, so he has it like right on his back. So I would have Aizen just Byakurai, like hit him with that Byakurai Kiro, and just blow a hole through his torso before helping him regenerate it. And now he has a whole scar on his back over where the 6 was. So yeah, that's gonna be how Aizen humiliates him. He takes his rank by blowing a hole through his torso, or through his back. He blows his back out in front of everyone. Oh man, I couldn't resist it. Fuck. Ichigo decides to jump right back into his he jumps right back into his visor training, and this time he's fully intent on trying to master his abilities. Whereas Ishida himself has started his Quincy training. Um, on the first day, Ichigo ends up going through with fully holifying. He wants to test his ability to control White's power and influence, and um, working synergy with White. So he ends up going through with a full holification. And when this happens, something interesting happens. Um, when he ends up fully manifesting the mask, the entirety of his larger blade goes white. And then it seemingly begins to crumble and fall into it bursts into a whole mass of white particles that then completely cover his body, and that's what forces him to holify. So rather than the white substance coming out of his mouth, instead his blade goes completely white whenever he has the full mask, and then it reshapes around him and forces him into holification. That's where the white substance comes from. It comes from his white blade, and he begins wielding his Quincy blade, and essentially White subjugates um, the old man Zangetsu. Whereas in the inner world, White tells him that if he wants to regain control, he's going to have to work with the old man and take him down. And Ichigo begins working with the old man Zangetsu, he wielding his smaller black blade against White and his larger blade. And that's basically what their training is. And this actually helps Ichigo develop his Quincy techniques. Um, Rather than being able to use Flash Step and Sonido, he has to learn how to use um, what is it called? Uh, Quincy Hairen Kyaku. Hairen Kyaku. Yeah, pure flying step. That's what he ends up using, Hairen Kyaku, to begin moving around. Um, I learned that it's actually technically more efficient because rather than just moving in a burst, rather than just increasing your speed, it actually allows you to glide. You create like a surface in the air, and you glide across it, or you just create a surface of reishi particles, and you glide across it at high speeds, and it's more efficient because of that. It also doesn't make any noise, so he has that advantage over White. Even though he might not be able to keep up with White, he can hear him every single time he moves. And sometimes it kind of all blurs together when he decides to really go all out. But Ichigo is getting faster and making use of Hairen Kyaku with Flash Step more and more easily. It becomes more and more fluid, a lot like when he was battling against Byakuya. And he ends up, whereas he learned how to shoot balas out of his larger Sanpakuto, which White is now showing off against him. Ichigo begins to essentially shoot arrows from the tip of his blade. They start off as small little blue projectiles, but they end up becoming more and more sharp as he begins to battle more and more against White. And of course, the visors are on the outside, exhausting Ichigo. Eventually, Ichigo just collapses out of exhaustion. He's not able to defeat White just yet, but he does have an idea on how he'll be able to do so. So later that night, he goes over to Ishida's place, or at least he talks about it. He goes home and he's like, "I'm really gonna have to find Ishida. I'm gonna have to talk to him soon." And this is where Ishin pops in, and he says, I think I can help you with that." And he brings up, "Yeah, I know Ryukin. I know his father. I'll give you the address. You go on ahead and go ahead. You go ahead and go talk to your friend. I'll stay here and watch after the girls." And Ichigo thanks him, and he heads out to Uryu's place. But still at the Kurosaki home, Ishin walks up the stairs, knocks on the girls on Yuzu and Karin's shared bedroom, and he asks if they could come down to the kitchen because he needs to talk to them. The girls have been avoiding talking to Ishin and Ichigo, and while Ichigo has noticed, He's unfortunately had a few other things on his mind taking up his attention, but Ishin has noticed. He knows that they were listening in, and he decides to properly explain everything to the both of them. Ichigo had the context of knowing everything, knowing at least the basics of the spiritual world, knowing the basic about Quincy's and Shinigami and Hollows. But Ishin decides he should tell them everything, only if they want to know. This world, getting involved with it, it's not going to be easy. It's not exactly something that anyone can handle. But if this is what they want, he'll tell them everything. In front of him, Karen has her arms crossed, but she's contemplative. While there is a bit of a glare on her face, there's also something that's worried. She glances over to her twin, and Yuzu is unsure. But eventually but glancing back at Karen, they stare into each other's eyes for a small moment before nodding together at each other and turning towards their father and nodding once more. This time, both just as firm and just as resolute. They want to know everything. Don't leave a single detail out. So, Ishin decides to sit down and he tells them everything. He tells them about the Shinigami, the Quincy, the Hollows. He tells them the basics of their abilities, their nature. He tells them about the cycle of reincarnation, Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, all that stuff. He gives them the rundown. And that night, they both go to bed, and they each ask themselves a question. Are they going to leave this all to their father and brother? Or what exactly are they going to do with this knowledge? They go to bed unsure, but something in the both of them, is beginning to grow. A resolve, a want, a desire, a will to fight and to protect. Of course, that's going to be a little further down the line, so we'll leave that there with them, and we'll jump right back into Ichigo's perspective. He's headed over to Ichida's place, and Ishida himself has just regained his Quincy powers. He's had that first training session where he gets pierced by his father right in the heart, or just like a few millimeters to the left of it or whatever. He's just regained his powers. He's just re-unlocked them. His spiritual powers, the gears are turning once more. Sorry about that. Got a little thirsty. But yeah, the gears are turning once more, and Ichigo explains to the both of them everything. Also, obviously, Ryukyun kind of knows all this, but Uryu is kind of shell-shocked. Holy crap, Ichigo was a Quincy this whole time. His mom was a Quincy. Are his sisters Quincy's? And that kind of gets Ichigo's attention. Damn. What about the girls? He really needs to talk to them sometime soon. A little too late. But he's not entirely sure. He'll bring them around sometime when this is all settled. But right now he wants to get stronger. He wants to learn more about being a Quincy. And Yukin says that they are done training for the day, but to come by tomorrow in the evening. He's going to be putting Uryu through his paces, so to come by sometime tomorrow. And Ichigo ends up settling into a training, a bit of a training arc with both the Vizards and Ryugen. Every day from whenever, obviously he has to do school, but like every other day he kind of switches off. He'll do training with the Vizards one day, where he is once again forced into holofying and has to fight against White in his inner world with old man Zangetsu backing him up, whilst his holified body is fighting against the Vizards. And the next day he'll head over to the Ishidas, and he'll head over to the Ishida household, and he'll begin learning the basics of how to make use of basic Quincy abilities. But he does so in his human body because that's how Quincy's fight. They don't really have they don't separate their soul from their body. They just fight in their human bodies because they're humans. So he begins fighting in his he begins learning how to draw on his Quincy abilities. He learns the basics of how to form the bow. He learns the basics of their movement techniques, their various equipment, although he does note that he's most likely not going to be making too much use of their specialized equipment. He really just needs to know the basics. And Ryukin says that that's fine. You can make use of just the basics in combat, but you're going to learn. You're going to learn no matter what. And that kind of gets Ichigo to be like, all right. But, yeah, so he has to kind of juggle school as well as his training with both the Quincy's and the Vizards. Um, Sometime during this, like, it was almost like 2 months. Yeah, it was like the first week of September to the end of December, or the end of October. Um, yeah, that's when everyone came. That's when the Arrancar made their appearance near the end of October. So yeah, he has almost a full, more like a month and 3 weeks. But yeah, he gets like a month and 3 weeks to train with both the Visors and the Ishidas, and he does make solid progress. After like 2 weeks, he's progressed enough with his Quincy abilities. He's learned how to make use of blood vein and blood artery. Not at the same time, because that's not something that can be done, but he does know how to use both of the techniques. He's better with Haiden Kyaku than ever before. And then, what is their arrows called? What are their arrows called? Their arrows are called Heilig, Heilig, Heilig Fial. Holy arrow. Okay, I'm just gonna call them the holy arrows. He learns how to use their holy arrows. Right? He learns how to use Quincy arrows. Jesus, Heilig Fial. They couldn't have used an easier language. Of course, they had to go with German. Ugh. Okay. Yeah, he begins to learn how to make use of to manifest. He just learns all the basics, and with that, he learns a few new abilities whilst in his Shinigami form, whilst making use of his Quincy blade. Um, Whenever he shows this off against White one day, when he, similarly to how White, when using the mask, is able to make his blade turn white, Ichigo learns how to reshape his smaller Quincy blade into what looks almost like a dual-sided. It basically becomes dual-sided. And he's like, is that supposed to help? And he's like, yeah, basically. He holds it up like a bow, and a string, the string just kind of manifests from Reishi, and he begins to make use of proper Quincy arrows, whilst also being able to use it as a double-bladed kind of glaive thing, like Darth Maul or Thanos with his double-sided glaive. He's able to make use of his blade a lot better. He gets better and better at working together with Old Man Zangetsu. He's able to use his arrows to counter Balas and Getsugas. He's able to unleash very interesting Getsugas. Like, he's able to twirl it around before unleashing it, and it gains momentum and power. He's able to just hold on to the Getsuga, and he begins learning how to just hold on to the Getsuga in his blade and only unleashing it when he strikes at the point of contact, basically powering up his strikes with Getsugas rather than just letting them fly out. He holds on to them and he begins tearing through White's black Getsugas. White's black Getsugas, wow. He begins to tear through his attacks, and he gets better and better at fighting against White when he's not holding back. And eventually, he is able to regain control from White while he's hollified. He's able to stab into him, and he begins to blacken, and Ichigo claims both of his Zangetsus for himself once more. And he wakes up in the real world. He breaks free from his hollow shell, but he still has the mask. And this time he's in control. And right out the gate, he has a much better time with the mask. He probably has somewhere around 11 seconds right off the bat. And this is after like I'd say like 2 weeks of training. 2 weeks into their training, he's able to gain control from White. And after that, his training just kicks into high gear. He's sparring against Udio all of the time, whilst the both of them try to survive the onslaught from Yukin. He's strengthening his body, his physical, mortal body, to be able to handle his own spiritual pressure a lot better. and or his own spiritual energy, his own Ryatsu, and eventually he begins to make a lot of headway with manifesting and taking control of the mask. He's better with balas. He's able to he's similarly to how he learned how to hold the Getsugas in his blades. He's holding balas in his hands to be able to kind of throw them as punches. Um, so he can just kind of sock people with balas. He's even doing it with his legs, the occasional kicks. Even if it's not his style, he at least wants to know. And he's merging his three um, speed movement techniques into one in order to be able to really maneuver around the battlefield and hold the speed advantage. It's taking him some time, but he is getting the hang of it more and more and more. Um, Orihime does, she does show up, and Tsubaki is thankfully restored, her offensive ability, and she does eventually go to Soul Society. And we do get back to the return of the Arankars. Um, so, Ichigo has his rematch with Grimmjow, and rather than losing control, rather than just having his mask dissipate after 11 seconds, this time he's able to hold on to it for maybe around 44 to 47 seconds. We'll just say 44 seconds. So he's almost able to hold on to it for an entire minute at this point. And he is able to give Grimmjow the hands while he has control. He's also not. He's also learned how to wield both blades while he's hollified, or while he has his mask. He's gotten used to. He's broken his habit of sheathing his Quincy blade whenever he uses the mask. Now he's able to work in synergy with both of his Zanpakuto spirits at the same time. So he's able to throw out some interesting combos. A black and red Getsuga Jijisho. Yeah, it would be like one of the Getsugas is black and red, the other is black and blue because of his hollowified nature. The various arrows that he fires out from the tip of his blade are black and blue, and he just begins tearing into Grimmjow. He damn near kills him, but Grimmjow shows off that he's no joke when he begins firing Cero Blasts in retaliation. And he's once again about to draw his Zanbakuto, but both Ichigo and Grimmjow are startled when Grimmjow when Ichigo's hollow mask break. Ichigo manages to gain his bearings at the same time that Grimmjow does, and here they're a lot more even rather than Ichigo getting curb stomped the second he loses the mask. They're a little bit more even, especially with Grimmjow being so injured, but they're able to kind of stalemate for a little bit. Ichigo's getting ready to recall on the mask, but unfortunately Grimmjow manages to get in that kick right to the head, kind of dazes him, and it completely breaks his concentration for kind of re-synergizing with Light and the old man at the same time. It requires a lot of concentration to do that, so that is one of his biggest weak points. It's not just a time limit, but the time limit is only a thing because of his need to concentrate on the balance between his powers. So that is the unfortunate downside, and Grimmjow notices this. As long as he keeps up the pressure, Ichigo won't be able to bring out the mask. So he begins pummeling into Ichigo. It takes time for him to break into Ichigo's defenses, but eventually it does happen. Only for Shinji to show up and take care of Grimmjow, temporarily at least, until they're all eventually called back. The loopy guy, Grimmjow's replacement, is still killed. And Orihime is unfortunately still kidnapped. Ichigo, not being in as bad of a shape, instead of just being partially healed, is properly healed by Hachi. Orihime leaves the notes on. Yeah, Orihime just leaves, as she does. She says goodbye to Ichigo, and unfortunately, Ichigo is discussing things with his two halves of Zangetsu, and they're too focused. They're too focused on discussing how to improve on their balance, on Ichigo's balance his balancing act of the two of them whilst in battle. Um, so Ichigo does learn about Orihime, um, and they are all, they're all preparing to head on out to Hueco Um, Ichigo is actually the one to retrieve Uryu, and Ichigo, Chad, and Uryu head into Hueco during the night. And Grimjow has his arm restored by Orihime, as well as the scar on his back, and the six returns. So he's once more restored as the Sorry, this is where Loopy dies. I don't even care about that guy, honestly. Yeah, Grimjow kills Loopy, and he not only gets his arm restored, but the scar on his back disappears. And after killing Loopy, he regains his rank as number 6 Espada. So, the squad arrives in Hueco Mundo. Okay, yeah. The squad arrives in Hueco Mundo, and everyone can feel the tremors as they break in, with Renji and Rukia not too far behind. Aizen calls in his meeting for everyone, and everything with the Espada goes down just about the same. But Ichigo is noticing that he can feel White just so eager in here. As they're here in Hueco Mundo, he can feel White wanting to come out, wanting to grow stronger. He almost every single battle that they have, especially like with the Dordoni. Jesus, that is the longest name that for that guy that Ichigo fights. Yeah, hold on. I'm gonna need like a very quick moment. I want to make sure I have everything right. I need 1 second. Okay, sorry for the quick break. I had to take care of something real quick, but right. Dordoni. Ichigo has his battle against Dordoni. I also completely forgot Nell even existed, but yeah, Nell shows up with Donachaka and whatever the skinny one was named. Ichigo has his battle against Dordoni is what is really important here, and Dordoni is a bit of a wash. Ichigo is very easily, like at any point in time so far, Ichigo is, at this point at least, stronger than his Bankai counterpart, his canon Bankai counterpart. So yeah, Ichigo is able to match Dordoni with every single thing he throws at him. Every single kick, he's able to easily raise up his blades in order to block him. Of course, as Dordoni begins to reveal more of his power, every single time he shows off a little bit more, Ichigo is initially taken by surprise. So he is sent into that same kind of big old room. He's just tossed through a couple of rooms, but no kicks really land against his flesh. That is until he, of course, activates his Resurrection, which really changes the pace of the battle. Ichigo is kind of underestimating him at first for a brief moment until his Ryatsu explodes, as does the wind, as he begins, forming those tornadoes with those snakes at the end of them. And as those giant tornadoes are sent towards him, Ichigo begins to take the battle a little bit more seriously. He begins charging proper Getsugas, and he's able to cleave through them. But Dordoni, after noticing how seemingly ineffective his attacks are, he actually uses them as a bit of a smokescreen, as he gets in close and lands a solid kick to Ichigo's midsection, only for Ichigo to not budge. He turns towards Dordoni, and underneath his Shihakusho is the pulsating sign of blue to vein, only for the blue color to shift to red as it grows, as the circuitry as the red circuits crawl up his arm into his right arm as he swings his massive as he swings his massive blade and charges a bala along the edge of the blade as well, and he manages to cut into his skin and send Dordoni flying back. that was a bit of a combo he had wanted to work on, making use of balas and blood artery to replace his need for Getsugas. He could use them as basically attacks that are just a step below his normal Getsugas, in order to really test his opponents. And seeing as how that managed to cut through his skin, he doesn't really think he's gonna need much more than that. So he begins sending blood artery, the red veins pop on his skin, the vein, yeah, the red arteries, because it's blue artery. The red arteries appear on his veins. I'm so stupid. I'm just gonna say the red light, the red circuits, the blood artery appears on his arms, and he begins to tear into Dordoni, and he eventually kind of just leaves them there after completely humiliating him. Dordoni does end up trying to hit him with a Cero, but of course Nell has Ichigo covered, and in response, um, and she ends up eating it and then spitting it right back at him, which is what eventually defeats Dordoni once and for all. So Nell got in the last hit on Dordoni, so yay for that. I don't really see nothing too much, nothing too different happening with Chad and Uryu's fights. Maybe Uryu shows off like he's been learning a little bit of blood vein since he's been training with Ichigo. So maybe he shows off some blood vein for himself, briefly, to kind of just up his defenses. But he's not really much of an up close fighter, so he's not really going to be showing himself. He's not really going to be showing that kind of ability off. All in all, their two fights go mostly the same. What we really need to get into is the first fight against Ukiura. Ichigo is able to make it into the castle, and he's able to get to Orihime, but of course Ukiura is the one who stands in his way, and this is where things really begin to change. Ichigo does not hesitate in charging directly against Ukiura at full power. He's not using his mask or anything, but he's not really holding back either. At least he doesn't really think so. He gets up close and personal, and he begins a barrage of sword strikes. But he's not really able to get anywhere far. He's not really able to make that much progress all that quickly. That is until he decides to begin charging them with blood arteries and Getsugas, because he knows this is a proper Espada. He can't really afford to hold back against this guy. So he begins to charge his blades with Getsugas, and begins, he once again resumes his barrage against Ukiura. And Ukiura notices that they've become blackened. The Getsugas have turned black. And he notes that they're similar to the Cero Oscuras, but that as he is now, he won't be able to defeat him. He's not strong enough. He isn't even able to push him into his resurrection. So he does begin to take Ichigo a little bit more seriously, but he tells Ichigo to really begin using his power. He knows he's not digging deep. He knows he's not using as much power as he could. And Ichigo responds, yeah, he's not. As he pulls down, as he makes the clawing motion, and his mask appears. This time with the entire left side completely covered with red stripes. He can hold this up for being in Hueco Mundo has just strengthened his connection to white. So he knows he'll be able to he'll be a lot stronger. But it's also making white a lot more excited, so he might just lose control. He's gonna have to be very careful. So he does begin engaging. He re-engages Ukiura with his larger blade, now completely white, and his Getsugas have only become that much more powerful. So have his strikes. So has his usage of blood artery, and eventually Ukiura decides to properly fight back by launching a Cero Oscuras point blank. But Ichigo is able to make use of a black Getsuga Jujisho to completely dispel it. And while Ichigo is left somewhat panting, he's like a little tired, Ukiura notices that their attacks were completely equal. So maybe this Ichigo person does have some kind of merit to himself. Maybe there really is a reason why Lord Aizen is keeping such a close eye on him. But it won't be enough. he ends up getting in close, and he manages to completely bypass Ichigo's usage of Iron Skin. He had just made use of blood artery, so he wasn't able to raise blood vein in time. Maybe he could have survived, but as he is now, he's bleeding out. His mask dissipates. His blades clatter to the floor. The white seeps back into black from his larger blade, and any type of color begins to completely drain from his body as he begins to die. Ukiura leaves, and eventually Grimmjow does show up and forces Orihime into, or Orihime has her confrontation with Ukiura, and Orihime is then forced by Grimmjow into healing Ichigo. Ichigo was at that point doing everything he could to cling on to life. He wasn't dead just yet. He had managed to weakly engage blood vein in order to keep himself from completely bleeding out, and Orihime is able to restore him back to full strength. He gets up and he notices that Grimmjow is there, and they begin to stare each other down. Ichigo is a little shaken, and both of his Sanpakuto spirits are quiet at first, but White speaks up and tells Ichigo that he better not hold them back this time. They're putting this guy down for good, and Ichigo agrees. If it comes down to it, he's killing Grimmjow. But for now, that will be the end of this part. So, we just left off with Ichigo's about to engage against Grimmjow for their third and final bout, and Ichigo has decided to resolve himself. He was damn near murdered by Ukiura, and now Grimmjow is coming at him trying to fight. So he's not going to be holding back whatsoever. This time he's going for the kill, no matter what it takes. As long as he can protect the people he cares about, he'll do whatever. So, yeah, Ichigo is actually resolving himself to kill, which he doesn't really do. He's not really one to kill people, but if he needs to, he will. That's what he's decided. So, yeah, we're going to leave off right there. We're about to get into the third bout between Ichigo and Grimmjow, and yeah. Like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you do like. If there's anything that you don't, let me know what you think I could have done better, or just whatever I did that was straight up wrong, and what you think I should do instead. No overtly rude or offensive comments. Don't really care for it. You're just wasting everyone's time with that kind of crap. And if you have any suggestions for any new kind of videos or different what if topics you want me to cover, let me know. I'll be sure to look through them and take them into consideration. And yeah, that'll be all for today. Bye-bye.